Welcome to this week's edition of the Huff-Heinz Institute for Sports Medicine and Human Performance podcast. I'm your host, Tim Lightfoot, and I'm so glad that you took the time to download us. And hopefully you'll be enjoying this podcast here in just a few minutes. As all of you are aware, we're all in the middle of the pandemic, and most of us are sheltering in place right now. If you're sheltering in place, we continue to encourage you to exercise. That's something you can do to help your immune support and your immune functioning. As we have said before, you can go to our homepage at huffheinzinstitute.org, and right there on the top of the page, there are links to the exercise recommendations from the American College of Sports Medicine and the World Health Organization. And if you can't get to the homepage, if you look right down here at the bottom of the screen, that's where that link is directly goes to ACSM guidelines. So again, we want you to be active and healthy even in the midst of this pandemic. Now, many of us we've all been going through this pandemic for 6 to 7, 8, even 3 months for some of us. And so some of us are getting tired of being inside. Many of us are getting tired of hearing news about the virus. And so as we started last week with the podcast, the Institute's podcast, we're going to take a little bit less serious look. No less some valid scientific ideas and things that are going on, but certainly we're going to take a look at the more humorous, the lighter side of science. And this week, I'm really pleased to have one of the doctoral students that I work with on a daily basis, Mr. Nathan Keller, join us here in the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Nathan.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate you letting me out of the lab. That's nice. I get to wear real clothes instead of the burlap sacks that we normally have to wear.
Yeah, and so you know what, and that's a wonderful inside joke because most people don't know that we haven't been able to be in the lab in about the last month, and so we've been doing science remotely, as they say. But you know, there was a reason that I asked Nathan to come on. We usually don't have students or our doctoral students come on for a while, but we wanted to bring Nathan on so he could share with you something that he's been doing. But let me give them a little bit introduction about your background, Nathan, and then we'll just jump right into it. Nathan got his bachelor's degree from Texas A&M University, or TCU. He was a high school teacher for 5 years, high school science teacher for 5 years. And if you look really hard on YouTube, you can actually find some of the videos that he would do with his students.
Yeah, look real hard.
If you got to look real hard, but if you look at those, you'll see that a lot of them revolved around space. And Nathan has a real affinity and interest in everything space related. And so about two and a half years ago, he decided to take the plunge, come back to school, get his PhD in kinesiology, so he could eventually work with NASA. That's one of the things he wants to do. He's very interested, and he's working right now with one of our recent podcast guests, Dr. Anna Diaz-Artelis, who was just a video podcast about 10 podcasts ago. And he's working on the role of microgravity as a countermeasure in spaceflight. So how do you kind of offset some of the things that happen in spaceflight? Yep. And one of the reasons that I asked Nathan to come on today was because in a recent statistics class, Nathan was given an assignment for the semester. And many of us that have taken these classes, we're given these kinds of assignments, and we'll go and find the most mundane kind of database that we have, and we'll start to do it and so forth. And Nathan took a little different approach that has not yet failed to intrigue people when I have mentioned it. So I brought Nathan on. I'm going to have him tell you a little bit more about that database and how he got into it and some of the things that he found by looking at that. So Nathan, what was this database that you were doing?
This database so let me be clear. Let me preface this. I actually went to look for astronaut health data. And while looking for astronaut health data, I came across UFO reporting statistics. And I thought, well, that's kind of curious. And then I looked a little harder at it, and there were nearly 100,000 reports. And I thought, that's a lot of reports, and there's got to be something interesting in there. So that's when I decided to take a completely different track on this whole thing and just start looking into UFOs. And it got me here. So apparently it wasn't a completely terrible idea.
So I'm betting that the majority of the people that are listening to this all of a sudden just woke up and said, what? UFO sighting data?
UFO sighting reporting data, yep.
You mean there's enough data out there to look at that? So Yeah, walk us through this, because you actually came up with some pretty fantastic data and some pretty interesting conclusions, and because you also pulled in some other information as well. So
For
tell
sure.
everybody about what you did with this.
Yeah, so this was a quite a bit more than I realized I was biting off when I started to bite this thing off. Um, I had a whole lot of research that I had already done, and I was excited to go out and get and collect some data. And instead, it turned out to be a completely different thing. But the reporting data itself is self-reported data. So this is a website that you can go to. It's a National UFO Reporting Center. And there's another kind of sister body to that, another website, but they collaborate with each other. The National UFO Reporting Center publishes this data, and it is self-reported data, so you can go on, or anybody can go on and put some information in there. So you can get the date and time that you saw something unusual. You can record the shape of the thing that you saw, how long it lasted, and of course where you are. And it will aggregate all of that onto the website. Now, the website doesn't make it terribly easy to get that data, so periodically people will go in and scrape all of that data and put it into a spreadsheet so that you can then go and look online and do whatever you want with it, I guess. And it was clear to me that, people had made some interesting graphs, correlating things within the data set itself, but nobody had really gone in to say, well, we've got 100,000 of these reports. Where do you even start to look? If you're looking for a needle in a haystack, if you're going to start to try to chase some of these down, what are you going to do? And nobody had aggregated them together into something that you could look into. So my idea that I came into it was look at some trends and then see if I can assign a credibility score of some kind, like a rating of different sightings, and see if some of them are potentially worth looking into. To say, well, okay, this, if you're gonna look at 100,000 of these things, might as well start with the ones that are the most credible. So that was the idea behind the project itself. Now, the project, interestingly, you may have heard, you may have even had it on the podcast here a few years ago. There were some guys out of MIT, some other grad students that did this exact same project, and they used NFL data and NFL stats, and they published that and ended up on the ESPN and stuff like that. So this is the same class. I think she was in that class. Dr. Ortiz was in that class, and I think she wanted to bring that same level of legitimacy. And so now here I am doing UFOs.
And so it's really cool. I didn't want to break in because this is a database that certainly, if someone sees a UFO, they can go in the database and they can add their own observation.
Yes.
To this as well. And so this is publicly available data.
Uh-huh.
People might notice out now suddenly I'm broadcasting from an alien spaceship as well in honor of your statistical
Thank you.
things that you.
I'm broadcasting from a real spaceship.
And but that's what's amazing. I'm not sure that people understand that this kind of data is available publicly that people can get to. And so you were just able to go out and pull that data to use that as the backbone for your project.
Exactly. And I had no idea it was available either. I was searching for something completely different and came across this and thought, well, this is just way better. So I'm just going to do this. This is a lot more fun. And it has been. It's been a lot of fun.
So Nathan, talk to us about what you looked at, what kind of questions you addressed with this data. I mean, people may be going, okay, well, you said I'm going to look at the credibility scores.
Right.
But it became so much more than that. And I think you've got some of the data to show us as well.
I do. I have some of the data to show you. I want to, well, first I want to make a disclaimer.
Okay.
I'm not looking for the little green men. I'm not looking for the aliens, but I'll share a story with you. This is kind of why I thought, all right, this might be something worth doing. Back in 2004, I was on a trip to Europe, and I was in Western Europe, and I happened to be in Scotland, and we were visiting these burial cairns, CAIRN. And so it's a place where they honor their dead and bury their dead in ancient times and pre-Roman times. And the tour guide said, well, if you look at the configuration of these three cairns that were laid out in a line, it matches the configuration of the pyramids of Giza. And I thought, well, there's no way. And I questioned him on it. And he said, well, actually, you'll find that there are similar arrangements of structures in Mexico and in China. And I thought that can't be true. So it stuck with me. And when I got home, it's again 2004, so the internet kind of wasn't what it is today. It was a little harder to do this stuff, but I followed up on it and followed up on it. Turns out, see, to me, I thought, well, that's, maybe there's something amazing here. Maybe there's, some kind of prehistoric culture or something, something that unites all of these different cultures together. And it turns out it wasn't a prehistoric culture. It wasn't aliens. It wasn't gods or angels or anything. It was a love of space, actually. So what these three cultures or four cultures had in common is that they look up in the night sky and they all saw what we of Mediterranean descent would call Orion's belt. And the three pyramids of Giza, the cairns, the temples in Mexico, they all have exactly the same arrangement. And they also have different structures within them to measure the longest day of the year. So if you're a early budding, human culture, it's useful to keep track of the cycles of the year because you're, planting and reaping crops. And so it wasn't something supernatural, but it actually revealed, at least to me, to my own personal discovery, that what these cultures had in common was their love of early space, their love of the movement of the stars and using science to improve their society. And so it was that lesson that I took from that to apply to this, was what could I find? Could there be some kind of trend or something useful in this data set that actually can be of benefit to somebody, that can reveal something about ourselves that we didn't realize was a connection point. Now I realize I'm somewhat limited by the fact that this is national UFO reporting data, so this is just within the US. So it may at least say something about Americans and not necessarily about people in other parts of the world, but at least it may be a data set worth looking into.
Well, okay, that's cool background, but I think we've been building up the anticipation now.
Okay, all right.
So we've got to show the audience what you found as you started to look at this.
Okay, all right. So here's, let me show the first one here. So this is all of the reports going all the way back going back to 1910, organized by state. So the states are organized. If you're just listening to this, my apologies. But the states are organized on the bottom there alphabetically. Are you seeing that?
Yes, I am.
All right, very good. And so you can see poor DC down there, not very many reports. But the big column, if you're just listening, is California by landslide, by like twice as many. California has by far the most reports, and then the next is Florida, and then Washington, and then Texas. As far as what you get out of that, probably not much. These states all have a lot of coastline. That's the only thing that I was able to extract from that. But if you have a particularly favorite state, you may want to look in there. Look at that. I will draw your attention to Minnesota. Let me see if I can annotate. Minnesota. That's this guy right down here. Can you see that? There's Minnesota down there, very low down on the list as far as total number of sightings. So that will come back again later. We'll come back to that idea in Minnesota here toward the end. Let's see. Let me share another one with you. So this is through time. So this is just months of the year. So we've got just starting in December, kind of color coded by season, and the little pyramid in the back there is the secondary axis over there on the right. But you can see there that there's a definite seasonality to the data, right? So you can see that as you go through the months, as we hit June, there's a big uptick in the total number of sightings in June, and then it spikes in July and kind of gets a little lower as we get into the cooler months. So let's say just you looking at that, I mean, what does that mean to you? What do you think is important about that?
Well, for me, it would look like certainly we've got the back end of the year is when things start to really happen. But again, you think about, as you said, some major things going on in the summer, especially in July and towards the back end of the year.
Yep. Yeah, I think we've got a lot of holidays. You're not going to get a sighting of anything if you're inside. And so if you go outside, then you actually have a chance of seeing something. So not too surprising that in the months of the year that people are spending outside, that they're actually seeing things and reporting more. So that's not really terribly surprising, but it does reveal something that I will point out. I'm not going to go through the whole presentation, but you need people to have sightings. And so if you do a population density map of the United States, and you let me stop this. If you do a population density map of the United States, you'll see that most of the people are on the East Coast. You'll see big pockets if you look at just the map itself of all of the cities. If you then do a similar map of all of the sightings reports, and you have a single dot for every sighting going back to 1910, it's the same map. You have sightings where you have people. And, so you need to have people, and you need to have people outside in order to have yourself a sighting. And so those are just the things that are kind of baked into some of the statistics that you'll see. And so so for example, if I were to ask you, like, what day of the week would you expect to see most UFO data? And I looked at this.
Be Saturday.
Be Saturday, right? Those are the days that everybody's outside, obviously. So yeah, same exact thing. There's statistically different, statistically higher than the mean for the number of reports that we get on Saturday than all the rest of the days. So not too surprising there. Let's see. We'll get into. Okay, well, let me ask you before I show you this. Day of the year, biggest day of the year. Can you think of any if we were to plot all of the days of the year on a calendar?
Well, this is unfair because I've seen your presentation.
Oh, that's true.
I know the answer.
Totally unfair. Well, then I'll put it to the viewers. Think about for a second, like your top 3 days of the year, where you might expect to see a UFO. Now, so I averaged all of the reports over 20 years. And so we've got what you're going to see here is a graph that's got days of the year plotted from left to right, starting with January 1st and ending December 31st. And so now I'll show this to you here. You see that? So not too surprising there. If you guessed July 4th, you are correct by a mile. The average number of sightings from 2000 to 2019 for a given day is somewhere around 10. And you can see on July 4th, they get about 73, quite a bit higher.
Yeah,
far higher than any other day.
Let me point out to the audience that you've got to look for July 4th because you kind of look down at the bottom and you go, look at all those down there, and July 4th is way up at the top.
Way up there near the top, yeah. Yeah, here we go. There we go. Can't miss it up there now.
Right.
And then the day preceding it, of course, July 3rd down here, the second biggest day being January 1st. And so what happens on those 2 days? You have fireworks. And so again, not too shocking that on the days that you have lots of fireworks, you're going to get lots of reports. If you're wondering about November 7th down here, corresponds actually to kind of an artificially inflated day. There was a particular day, I think it was 2015, where there were over 100 sightings on November 7th that was confirmed to be a naval missile test. So that number's a little bit higher than it deserves to be. But yeah, you can see that the 2 biggest fireworks days of the year and the days preceding those days are by far the most popular days for UFO sightings. So once again, just highlighting the fact that you're getting a pretty pronounced effect here on those particular days. So I've actually called that the fireworks effect in my report. So I think the fireworks effect is pretty important. I think the other effect that we could talk about, but I don't want to bore your listeners too much, is being close to a military base. So when I was looking deeper into some of the other things that I added to the main data set, I looked at how close each sighting was to the nearest active military base and found that there was an extremely high correlation there. And so that was something that we could figure out and statistically model and include in our credibility score. So if you are closer to a military base, you are much, much more likely to report a UFO sighting. So that was something that we wanted to include in our metric for UFO data. I've got one more.
Yeah, well, and I was going to ask you because what I think the next piece you're going to talk about really kind of shows the imagination and going just the one step further that makes, I think, really great science sometimes because you think, what else could be related to this phenomenon? And
right.
I'll let you take it from there.
Okay, well, I asked myself, well, all right, if we're going to throw a bone out there to the folks that believe this is an actual alien event, well, what other activity corresponds with alien events? Well, clearly it is abductions. So there should be some kind of record and some kind of data out there for people being picked up by the aliens and not coming back. And so there should be some kind of unresolved missing persons case. And since this is national data, there should be some kind of national data center out there that collects that. And it turns out that there is. So the National Crime Information National Crime Information Center publishes this every year, going back to 1990. So I went and scraped all that data together and wanted to do a plot of what I called unresolved missing persons cases. So kind of the way that works is every year they have a number of cases that go in, they have a number of cases that go out. They're not necessarily the same cases. They just kind of have a big pool of missing persons cases. But that's the closest that I could get with this kind of thing. So this, for those of you with small children at home, those of you with weak conditions, just be aware, this is rather shocking. So what we've got here is in the orange line. You follow me here with the orange line. That's the total number of sightings going back from 1990 to 2019. And then in the blue line, we've got unresolved missing persons cases. And so that's over here on the left axis, and then the orange line is plotted over against the right axis. And so you can see there's a trend there. Don't know how much you want to put into that, but again, kind of going back to my initial premise, I'm curious what this says about us, not necessarily what this says about extraterrestrial intelligences and their activities. Those do seem to kind of cycle, especially as you get to the end there, in step with each other. And I have tried. I've looked into what else can kind of cycle with this. So I actually ran what's called an autocorrelation against our sighting data here and looked for some kind of pattern in it. And it appears that there's approximately a 5-year pattern. If you go all the way back to 1947, there's a phenomenon in the UFO statistical data that they call flags, which is approximately 4 to 6 year interval in cycles of UFO reporting data, highs and lows in the data. And that seems to match up with my analysis here. And if you pair that up with UFO missing persons data, they seem to kind of go with each other. And so I asked myself, what other phenomenon pairs with this? I thought it may be, in the American culture, we have our elections every 4 years. Maybe it goes with that, but not really. Sometimes it does, depending on if you want to cherry pick a particular slice of time over the course of the entire timeline. But if you cherry pick another slice of time, there's no correlation at all between the overlap. So I don't know what that says about us, but I think that's a very interesting figure, and I think it says something, but I haven't figured out what that is yet.
Well, it's certainly since about 2012, and people in Aggieland would know 2012 is when Johnny Manziel won the Heisman Trophy. So perhaps
I hadn't thought about that.
That's what it all started off. Then.
Oh my goodness! Well, it peaked in 2014. I don't know.
So maybe we should leave that as unfounded speculation at this point.
Okay, more unfounded speculation, but unfounded speculation is what we're here for, isn't it? Yeah, especially as you get to the end of the graph there. That's really interesting. There was a lot of hubbub being made from 2013 to about 2017 about the decline in UFO sightings. It had been going up exponentially if you go all the way back to 1990. And actually, in my report, I correlate that with some of the technologies that emerged in the 90s as well. But it's interesting to me that it does taper off with the sort of saturation point of a lot of those technologies that occurs in the early to mid 2010s, when 80 to 90 to close to 100% of households, for example, had internet access and cell phone access. Right around that time, that you start to see some leveling off in this data and kind of a return to the cyclical nature that you start to see, or that you saw kind of prior to the mid 1990s. This, again, not something that I've showed here, but you could clearly make out a pattern in some of these in some of the sighting data that was being reported from year to year. And during really the boom of the internet and the information age, it was being masked a little bit. You can see here in the line. The diagonal portion of the line, it makes it a lot harder to see that cycle. But as you get to the end, you can see it in a really pronounced way. And people thought if you go back and read some of the literature from 2014, 15, 16, that the age of science was prevailing, and finally some of the UFO reporting was going to go away. But in fact, 2019, it spiked again, somewhat predictably, and some of the folks in the UFO community had predicted it as well. And if you look at the trend up to now, if you can actually, I went online for the 2020 data, and we're ahead of the 2019 data in terms of reporting. So I'm not sure how the pandemic is going to affect some of these reports now that a lot more people are inside. But if things had continued to go as they had in the first quarter of the year, we would have had a bigger year in 2020 than we had in 2019 for sightings. So it seems like the trend is still holding up.
Well, Nathan, this has been a really fun look at some data that I don't think anybody anticipated would turn out like this.
I certainly didn't.
It's a fun example of how even the most mundane classroom projects in class can actually turn out to be some fun at very least, but certainly educational. And certainly something that I think we can all look at and have a little bit of fun with as we move into hopefully the end of the pandemic before long. Most of our normal listeners know, our regular listeners know, that this is the time when we ask our guests to give us a take-home message, and you're not going to be an exception. We're going to let you out of that. So
take-home message.
Yeah. So if they remember nothing else other than our backdrops and the fact that this was about alien sightings, what is your take-home message for people?
My take-home message is that even the somewhat silly topics say something about us, and not to be afraid to delve into something just because it's a little bit silly. I'm certainly felt a little bit silly just coming on in the first place and talking about this thing. And yet there may be something interesting in there again that tells us something about ourselves. The credibility score that I came up with at the end of it, I was pleased to see that today the Pentagon actually put out some videos that actually date back to an event that my credibility score had predicted would be very credible. It was actually the fourth highest score of the entire data set. And so it turns out that even the Pentagon feels that event is credible as an unexplainable event. So you never know, if the credibility score, if the results of this experiment are something that people can go back and look at and find something interesting about, something about the human condition, then it was worth it.
Absolutely. And plus it got you on the podcast.
That's right. Nothing else was going to.
It gave us something else to think about other than COVID-19. So
and I'm no longer handcuffed to my lab bench, which is also nice. Got me out for a few hours.
That's right. And you're sheltering in place on the space station. So that's a good yeah. And so I hope that you are all sheltering in place, someplace fun, like the space station. We hope that you will continue to shelter in place and be safe. We remind people, let's follow those guidelines. Let's make sure you wash your hands at least 20 seconds, cough into your elbows, practice social distancing, and certainly stay active, because that will certainly help you stay healthy. And we hope that you will join us next time for another interesting person from the world of sports medicine and human performance. And until then, we do want you to stay active and stay healthy. Welcome to this week's edition of the Huffines Institute for Sportsmen. Blake won that one. They always bet on whether I screw up the intro or not. Who do you think it would win in a fight between Batman and Iron Man?
Batman and Iron Man? Giving that one to Iron Man.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
tech.
So the debate continues. I got a feeling that'll be an Easter egg.